Now, let's move on and speak to the British government this morning in the shape of the Levelling Up Secretary, Michael Gove. Mr. Gove, good morning.
Hi, good morning, Tom.
Thanks very much for joining us. Now, we just heard, I'm not sure you caught much of that, but extremely powerful testimony from a Ukrainian MP who comes from the city of Mariupol, not there at the moment, desperately worried about what he just said was that the Russians erasing his entire past by flattening his city. The noose is tightening around Kyiv, as well as a lot of other Ukrainian cities now as well. It does rather look like we're looking at a very long and ugly part of this war based on siege, as the Russian troops effectively try to starve populations to submission. Is that your take on what's happening on the ground now?
Yes, I'm no sort of military expert, but it does seem to be the case that the Russians, having failed initially in what they hoped would be a lightning strike that would decapitate the regime, now recognise that they're in for a longer haul. The conflict over the course of the last 2 weeks has not gone in the way that the Russians would have wanted, but we know that the Russians have a range of options at their disposal, some very grisly options. And what they're attempting to do now is, as well as taking ground militarily, they're also attempting to intimidate and to terrorize the Ukrainian population. But Ukraine's armed forces and its people are displaying enormous courage in the face of this provocation.
Now, one thing that has been mooted by the Prime Minister, amongst many others, that the Russians could do, one of those grisly options perhaps that you were considering there, is the use of chemical weapons. That is a way which we know Russian-backed forces in the very recent past in Syria have used to terrorize populations into submission. If Russia uses chemical weapons on those besieged cities, what does Britain do?
Well, you're absolutely right. Chemical weapons were deployed in Syria. Linked to that, Russia, as we know from what it did to the city of Aleppo in Syria with its allies there, and what it did to Grozny in Chechnya, is capable of the most grotesque devastation of cities, of population centres, of civilian homes. I pray that we don't see any escalation. But it's also the case that any response to any escalation is one that will have to be coordinated with our allies, and it will be the Prime Minister and the Foreign Secretary and the Defence Secretary who would lead on that. They have access to expert opinion on a range of options, and it's quite right that the decisions should be taken at the level of those who have the operational expertise, access to intelligence, and the diplomatic networks.
Okay, I remember a certain vote in the House of Commons in 2013 where you were passionately arguing in favour of Western intervention in Syria if the Syrians did indeed use chemical weapons, as it was proved they did. In fact, you had a stand-up row, famously in the House of Commons lobby with a senior member of the Labour Party at the time. Is it now the British government's position, is it your position, that we should rule out a military response if the Russians use chemical weapons?
Well, my position is the government's position, which is that we are there supporting the Ukrainian government in its fight against Russia. We're doing everything that we can in order to safeguard Ukraine's territorial integrity and its sovereignty. And we operate through our NATO alliance in order to provide support for Ukraine. If we look back to that debate, I think it's the case that people like Tim Farron, the Liberal Democrat MP, says that he deeply regrets voting against action then. Who knows what would have happened if we'd shown a greater degree of resolution then, but no one, I think, can doubt the degree of resolution that the United Kingdom government is showing now. As we know, it was Ben, the Defence Secretary, who was the first Defence Minister to ensure that lethal aid, the weaponry that the Ukrainians need in order to fight back, was provided at the earliest possible stage alongside training.
That I understand. My question was, do we rule out a military response if the Russians use chemical weapons?
I think that we have to do everything in concert with our allies, and it's not for me to promote or promulgate military doctrine. It is for me to say that we pray that we do not see an escalation. We want to work with our allies. The stakes are incredibly high, and it is important that I don't engage in freelance diplomacy. My job in government as part of the team is to help with the domestic response, not to formulate a diplomatic or military strategy.
I understand. You're also the government minister, kindly been put in front of us this morning. I thought I'd ask you. It
No, no,
doesn't
sure.
appear there's
Well,
an
perfectly
answer
legitimate to
yet.
ask. Yes, no, perfectly legitimate to ask. But again,
You're going to
we
stay on your
all have
brief.
different roles.
I understand. I understand. Let's talk about your brief. Homes for Ukraine is the sponsorship scheme that you're announcing this morning. Now, tell me if I'm wrong about this, but I always thought immigration policy, refugee policy was the Home Secretary's job. She obviously isn't doing it well enough. You've been deputised to take over.
No, immigration policy is the Home Office's, but it's also been the case that when we dealt with the Syrian refugee crisis in the past, there was a joint response. The Home Office was responsible for making sure that we identified the people who were most in need of help and support. But when people arrived here, it was also the case that the department, which I am now in, was responsible for working with local government and others in order to make sure that people could be settled safely in the UK. And one of the team who are helping to deliver this new policy, Richard Harrington, was the minister who was responsible for the Syrian refugee resettlement program in the past. He was a joint minister then between the local government department and the Home Office. He's a joint minister again between the local government department and the Home Office. And this scheme that we're outlining today is one that's been developed in partnership between our two departments, with the Home Secretary and I working together on it.
Okay, let's talk a little bit about how the scheme works if we can. So people can volunteer to house Ukrainians in their houses. They get paid 350 quid a month if they do that. The scheme is uncapped, so potentially hundreds of thousands of Ukrainians could come and be housed if there's enough good-hearted Brits there to do that. What sort of numbers are we looking at? Hundreds of thousands potentially?
I think we're talking about tens of thousands, but again, as you quite rightly say, the scheme is uncapped, and we want to make sure that uh, uh, anyone who does come forward recognises that there's a level of commitment. If you can get someone into your home, then you need to recognise that it will be for 6 months as a minimum. That is quite a significant commitment, but we know that there are lots of people who have already indicated that they want to help and support. And as I say, it all depends on a partnership between, as you quite rightly say, the many, many generous-hearted people in this country who have the capacity to provide support, and the government providing the additional resources to local government to ensure that people who have children can make sure that they're educated. And we also are making it clear that people who do come here can work from day one and contribute to our economy as well.
And claim benefits?
Yes.
Right, so full refugee status basically sounds like they're getting.
They will be wholly welcome here. We will put our arms around them. We will make sure that people have all of the support they need. We'll give money to local government so services can be provided. We know that a large proportion of those people who come will be women, children, and the elderly. But we also know that people hope and pray that they can return to their homes sooner rather than later. But given the dreadful military situation that we were discussing earlier, we need to be ready for a long haul during that period. I'm sure that there will be many Ukrainians who come here who want to work and integrate fully into our economy and do everything that they can to be part of a broader British family.
And they can do that. And just to be clear, the government has been criticised for acting far too slowly in terms to their reaction to this refugee crisis. When do you see the very first refugees homed in the UK under your new scheme? How quickly can you get it up and running?
I hope in a week's time.
A week's time, first refugees coming into a house. And will the Gove household, where you currently are or where you might be in your constituency, will they be taking refugee?
I'm exploring what I can do, yes.
Exploring, or yes? Sorry, is it you will or you're thinking about it?
I have particular personal circumstances, which I won't bore you with, Tom, which just require me to work one or two details out.
Okay, well, it sounds like you're quite interested.
Yes.
Well, that's very interesting to hear. Let's move on a little bit and talk about the cost of living if we possibly can, because that is a huge subject. People facing here in the UK the biggest hit to their living standards in 50 years or so since the 1970s, potentially. Energy bills going to go up 14 times faster than wages, is one calculation this year. Now, the Chancellor's announced some help so far on energy bills, but we're led to believe that, certainly in this morning's reporting, there is no big fresh intervention coming in the spring statement around 10 or so days' time. Is that your understanding as well?
Well, again, I mean, you're familiar with politicians speak. I know how irritating it can be for listeners, but the Chancellor in his spring statement keeps things tight, quite right too. I don't know what the Chancellor will be doing, but everything that we understand is that because our cost of living challenge is tight, the Chancellor needs to reassure the markets and others that he is, as he has been, proving an effective steward of the economy. That means holding a variety of things in balance. We have already provided support to help with energy costs. The record of the Chancellor is that when people need help, he is there to provide it. But the record of the Chancellor is that Rishi also recognises the importance of making sure that the books balance.
Doesn't sound like if you're trying to look after the household finances now, you're wondering how you pay your bills. Should you expect massive fresh help from the government in 10 days' time? It doesn't sound like it.
Well, again, there is already help. That help is already targeted at those who are most in
a new
need.
bazooka, as they say.
But everything has to be kept in balance. It wouldn't help anyone if we were to so recklessly extend borrowing that we then had to see interest rates rise further and more pressure on mortgage payments and so on. So the £9 billion that the Chancellor made available, that Rishi made available to deal with what we knew would be rising fuel costs, that's there. It's going to be distributed through lower council tax bills for people who are on medium and lower incomes. We also keep under review at all times what more we can do. It's also the case that Rishi and Kwasi Kwarteng, the business secretary, are developing an energy security strategy, which will do everything, I think, to ensure that people can have confidence that the United Kingdom is leading the way in providing cheap, safe energy in the future.
Let me just ask you one final thing about what Brits can do. Obviously, we saw the G7 deprive Russia of favoured nation status, so it's going to be a lot harder for Russian goods to be sold into places like the UK. In Germany, supermarkets are now refusing to stock Russian-made goods, certain types of vodka or whatever it might be. Would you like to see supermarkets do that here in the UK to tighten that noose? And what should we do as Brits? Should we not buy Russian-made goods in our supermarket if we see them?
Well, there are clear sanctions that the government's put in place, clear economic sanctions to make sure that we put the maximum amount of pressure on Putin. When it comes to individual actions, whether that's by supermarkets or individuals, I wouldn't, I don't think it's right for me in government to tell people what to do. It's a matter of individual choice.
Okay, one final question from me, and then Jack wants to come in as well. If it's no longer acceptable for Roman Abramovich to own Chelsea, should Putin KGB associate Alexander Lebedev, father of Yevgeny, still be able to own the Evening Standard? Because he has made a lot of publicly supportive comments in favour of Vladimir Putin's 2014 invasion of Ukraine. Yevgeny, his son, who runs the Evening Standard here in London, has also been very favourable of that. These are rich Russian oligarchs and their children propping up the Putin regime.
Well, Evgeny has been, Lord Lebedev has been clear in his condemnation of Putin's actions, and he's used.
But his father hasn't, and his father is the owner of the Evening Standard.
Well, again, I think it's always worth investigating the ownership structures and the corporate arrangements to make sure that we are not in a position where people who are linked to the Putin regime and supporting Putin are capable of using those assets either to enrich themselves or to influence our politics. But on the basis of the information that I have at the moment, there is no question but that Lord Lebedev, who the proprietor of the Evening Standard, is someone who has been clear in his criticism of Putin. And I think trying to I completely understand the connection, but it's important that we try to draw a distinction between the actions and statements of parents and the actions and statements of other relatives. It can often be the case that they are strongly at variance, and on everything that I've seen Lord Lebedev say, he is a strong and clear critic of Putin and his invasion. Forgive me, sorry.
Hello, Secretary of State. This is Jack Blanchard at Politico. I'm co-presenting today. I just want to take you back to your refugee scheme, which I'm sure everyone all over the country is going to be discussing today at home, talking about whether they might be able to put themselves forward to this. We were certainly having the conversation in our household last night. I'm just wondering, what support are you making available for people who want to do that? Because a lot of these people are going to be traumatised families. There's going to be vulnerable children. You can't just throw them into people's homes without offering support, presumably to the people who want to do it.
Yes. Well, again, as you say, I'm sure there'll be lots of people who'll be discussing what is it that we can do. So the first thing is, if you are prepared, if you do have the resource, not everyone will, to be able to provide rooms or accommodation, then you can register from tomorrow. Then from Friday, you can be matched with an individual Ukrainian family. In terms of support that's being provided, the government will provide you with £350 per month.
But I'm talking about professional
family.
support, with the sorts of people that might be coming over are obviously going to have been through the most horrific circumstances.
There are at least two things I'd say. The first is that we'll be funding the NHS and local government to provide the sort of mental health or integration support that will be required. The second thing is that we're not doing this on our own. There are wonderful charities, faith groups, and others that stand ready to provide support as well. And one of the things that we believe will happen in due course is that more and more of those groups will ensure that we can create networks where people who are providing a home to Ukrainians can work together in order to share knowledge, share that experience, share the ups and downs of this process. And that's why, over the course of the last few days, I, the Home Secretary, and other ministers have been talking to these organisations in order to see what we can do to help them help others.
And just finally, why is this scheme being offered to Ukrainians but not to other refugees, Afghans, Syrians in the past? Why is this different?
Well, we already took a number of people from Syria.
But there was no scheme like this with
20,000
payments to
people
families and that sort of thing, was there?
Well, again, one of the reasons why we are using this scheme is because it's already the case that quite a lot of the capacity that, sorry to use such a sort of horrible abstract word, quite a lot of the capacity that one might otherwise want to use in order to house refugees is already being used. So in many circumstances, the first port of call that you would think of would be government using its resources in order to get hotel places. It's already the case that there are more than 14,000, around 15,000 Afghans whom we've been resettling who are in those hotel places. So what we want to do is to make sure that we're opening up even more capacity in the system. And again, this is the first phase of our response. And it's because we're dealing with a humanitarian crisis, the like of which we have not seen in my lifetime.
Michael Gove, Levelling Up Secretary, as well as many other titles. Thanks so much for your time this morning. Always appreciate it. Good to talk to you.
Tom,